Techie Terry. Speaking of exposing me, though, speaking of exposing Terrace Michael Fleurs, I've been getting called out a lot the last few days. And I wanted to know whether I've been exposed. I wanted to ask you boys. I've been exposed for not calling out Phil Foden enough, for not criticizing Phil Foden enough. And I wanted to ask you guys the question. We know City are getting a lot of criticism at the moment. Do you feel that Phil Foden is getting protected too much? Do you think the media are protecting him too much? Do you think rivals are maybe not going in hard enough? Or is he getting the right amount of criticism for the current PFA Player of the Year having a hook, line, and stinker?
I'll be honest with you, as much as I'd like to start this section, sometimes I have to be a humble man and say it's even better that Mo starts this section. So go ahead, Mo.
Yes, to be honest with you, the player of the season is not getting enough criticism. He has to carry his team when they are down, and he's not getting enough criticism. I said it many, many times. You only judge top players when the team around him is not playing bad. Let me give you an example. Arsenal will call all the names in the world in the last 7-8 games, right? And who's performing, putting up numbers? Mr. Bukayo Saka. Cole Palmer at Chelsea last season. Chelsea are shit. They're terrible. They're 10th. Who's putting up numbers and had the most GA in the league? Cole Palmer. It is so easy for players to play when the team is playing well. When you have superstars around you and you're doing well and everyone is patting you on the back and doing this and that. But the reality is Phil Foden needed to step up. This is when you're needed. And don't give me Young. Because people only use Young when we criticize them. But they use the 6 Premier Leagues and the Champions League and the treble when they want to praise him. So you can't have it both. Is he either an experienced player at the age of 24 or he's young? He has won enough trophies and has played enough games to be an experienced player. And for him to carry the team. And don't tell me everyone around him is bad. If you are a player of the season, you rise. You're top notch. You carry the team. And I think a lot of the media are keeping, as you say, Terry, and I'm using your words, they're keeping their powder dry and they don't want to criticize them in case Man City come good again and Phil Foden start performing and now they are in the mud. No, I'm talking about Phil Foden today when Man City aren't playing well and you're supposedly the best player in the City team, you should perform. Why don't Saka get the same treatment? Why when Arsenal are bad and Saka's not performing in one game, Newcastle game, and he still created the clear-cut chance in the game. He got criticism from everyone in the media, Twitter and everyone, but Phil Foden doesn't. Phil Foden is one of the guys at Man City, and he's not getting criticism. Oh, I'm sorry, with all due respect, all the Gary Nevilles and Carragher's and everyone are protecting him, are patting him on the back. You should and also, to be honest, individually, he has won enough for us to sit here and criticize the guy. Cristiano Ronaldo gets criticism, everyone, Vinny Jr., Mbappe, but Phil Foden doesn't get enough criticism. And I think you as well, you yourself need to speak about it more because you allow people, you allow people on your shows to slag off Saka, Salah, Cole Palmer on your shows, right? And it's your channel. But when Phil Foden, for this the majority of the season, is not carrying the team and is not stepping up when everyone else done, I'm not going to look at Savinho to carry Man City. I'm not going to look at Doku. I'm going to look at the Gundogan. I'm going to look at Phil Foden. So you allow people to speak on Saka and Palmer. Phil Foden should be criticized on this channel as well, on every channel, because you won player of the season. Because he won player of the season. And that's
let me just address this though, right? So I have criticized Phil Foden for this season. I think he's been atrocious. My only pushback on any shows against the criticism against Foden or where it's agenda-based. And the reason that I push back is because I do push back against the agendas against Bukayo Saka and have done since day one. I push back against the agendas against Mohamed Salah. I push back against the agendas of Erling Haaland when people were saying he's a League Two player. I push back against the agendas against Cole Palmer being a flat-track bully as an example and said how amazing he's been. I think that the problem is people are going in on Foden, but they are going one step too far. So I do agree. I get your logic that he hasn't stepped up when his team needs him. The problem is with that logic, for me, is, well, a lot of people say that Henry's the GOAT. But Henry was only playing for Arsenal, and Arsenal were a very good team. So how far can you then be the GOAT if you only played well in a team that predominantly only played well? It certainly didn't have a run of form like this as far as I can remember. So therefore, because you're creating a new category now of, well, you've got to have done well to be considered a top player. You've got to have done well in a team that's underperforming to prove that. And I'm sure if we went through certain players, you could argue Lionel Messi. Does that take away from Messi's or Ronaldo's career? Because they haven't really played for teams struggling at almost any point in their career. However, I think it's fair to criticize Phil Foden for his poor performances. I think it's fair to rip into the fact that he has been atrocious, in my opinion, by his standards. Passing's been okay, approach play poor, shooting's been off. It looks a shadow of himself, and I think it needs to be criticized. What I struggle with, and I know why I've been called out, people want to hear more criticism towards him, but I feel so much of the, me and Gal had this out on a show, and I could just, Gal was essentially painting a picture, which I rejected, which is this poor season from Phil Foden proves that he's never been as good as Saka, that all those previous seasons mean nothing, because now that his team's struggling, he isn't stepping up. He isn't delivering. He doesn't look like a very good player.
Nobody believes that.
I reject that notion. I think it's too short-sighted because none of us, we mentioned Ryan Giggs earlier. I remember when Ryan Giggs in the early 2000s was going through a period where I was living in Manchester when this was going on. He was getting booed, how poor he was. Based on the Phil Foden logic that he didn't deliver when his team were in a bad moment for 3 or 4 months, therefore it writes off everything that's come before it. That means everything Giggs had done up until 2003 or whatever it was, because he had a bad 6 months, everything that came before it is now written off. Then he came through the other side, by the way, and that's why I'm prepared to criticize Phil Foden, but not write him off, because it is a short window of bad form in a team playing poorly. Most players, I remember Andy Cole was one of the greatest Premier League strikers of all time. He had some bad periods in his career. Eden Hazard, one of the best wingers in Premier League history, went an entire season, I think he scored 1 goal and was pretty poor the whole campaign. That one season doesn't write off what he did before and after. So I just feel like the overarching the analyzing of Phil Foden is flawed, because if you apply that certain logics to other great players in the past, you're undoing their legacies. I'm not going to do that. And secondly, people are using this bad period to create a conclusion about Phil Foden. It isn't just criticism. They're coming to a conclusion without all the data and information, and I feel that it is rather premature to do that. That's why I don't stick up for Phil Foden's poor season. I stick up against the motives that are being pushed.
The reality is, Phil Foden in the triple season, he was not an integral part. Here is the difference, Terry, between Thierry Henry was always the superstar, the best player for Arsenal. Even when Arsenal were okay, he was the guy, the standout guy. For Pep Guardiola's teams, and we all say that Pep Guardiola's system is the best in the history in leagues. Let's say that. He's not the GOAT manager, but he creates the best system to win leagues. It is easy to play in Pep Guardiola's team. Last season, by the way, in the second half of the season, when Phil Foden was good, was very good as well, Kevin De Bruyne was injured half the season, came in the second half and contributed to more games in the league in the second half when they were very good than Phil Foden, by the way. That means Kevin De Bruyne has done exactly the same as Phil Foden last season. The problem with that logic is that when you talk like Phil Foden has been amazing for multiple seasons and he has had only 4 months. I push back on this. Phil Foden, for all his career, has been one of the guys, one of the good guys at City. Same to Bernardo, similar to other people as well in that team. He wasn't an exceptional player like Rodri for multiple seasons, like Kevin De Bruyne for multiple seasons. Okay. He was good last season. So the sample size is not as big. Okay, people make it be. People talk. Let me just add this point. I'm sorry. I want to add this.
And then I want to ask you a question.
People sometimes talk about Phil Foden, and he has been exceptional for 4 or 5 seasons. When I push back on this, he has been very, very good only last season. So that's one season where Cole Palmer has been so, exceptional as well.
Okay. So I understand your point. But let me ask you a question about it. Right. And this is why I feel like a lot of people in the comments saying they agree with you and that you're cooking. But this is why I feel like it's agenda driven. Let's use Andy Cole as an example. A very good player for Man United, an exceptional Premier League player. His career was amazing. But you could argue, like Phil Foden, in our treble-winning season. He scored some good goals. He was important. But that season, you would put Stam, you would put Schmeichel, you would put Scholes, you would put Beckham, who came second in the Ballon d'Or. You'd put Dwight York.
Scholes?
Scholes was brilliant that season. Please,
Scholes was very good in that season.
Let's not muddy the water with any nonsense right now. You'd maybe put those 5 players. Please watch what he did in the semi-final. Let us not muddy the water, because let's just leave it where it is. Let's just put those 5, maybe 6 players above Andy Cole. So your logic that Phil Foden isn't the integral player, would you then agree, based on what you're saying, that Andy Cole wasn't Man United's most integral player when we won the treble?
Probably, yeah. Players are better than him in that season.
Okay, cool. So this is why I disagree, though, with sort of the level of criticism Phil Foden's getting at this age, at this stage of his career, and people are making end conclusions. Just because Andy Cole wasn't our most integral player in the treble-winning season, or even top 5 integral players in the treble-winning season, doesn't mean because of a poor run of form that he had at times in his career that it writes off all the good things that he did. And I think for me, that's the issue I have here. I'm not claiming that Phil Foden is the greatest footballer in Man City's history, one of the greatest English football players of all time. I've always thought he was an excellent football player. This man, for 5 seasons, has scored. He's been good in runs. He's had some big goals and moments in Champions League runs as well. I understand he may not have been the most integral player, but that's not a reason to write him off. And the only reason I can relate to this, and you should be able to do this as an Inter fan, is that I've had great teams at my club in all of our lifetimes where I've loved players like Andy Cole. I love players like Dennis Irwin doesn't even get a mention. You wouldn't even put him in our top 4 or 5 players in terms of integralness to a team. But he's one of the best left backs in Premier League history. And this is the problem that I have with it. Just because you have a team that's stacked full of stars and you may come in 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th in the pecking order, doesn't mean you're not still a great player by and large throughout the Premier League. It's just that team is stacked. We've had this conversation about Mo Salah. Because Mo Salah, when he first came through and started scoring at Liverpool, there was 4 or 5 other players that were being propped up above him by Liverpool fans, by the PR machine. Doesn't take away how good Mo Salah was. It's just the nature of the beast. And I think that people are bending over backwards to chop the legs from underneath Phil Foden for ulterior of I want to see my player held above him in these debates, or I've never really liked him. This is the chance to pounce. It's the logic I disagree. If you don't rate the player, say why you don't rate the player. But talking about him not being integral, well, there's loads of great Premier League players that are greats who weren't the most integral players in their team winning trophies. We think about Arsenal's invincible team. Henry would come up as the most integral. Who would then come up next?
Bergkamp. Silva.
Vieira. By the way, we haven't even got to Robert Perez yet, right? So you start going down the pecking order, then you get to someone who's like 6th or 7th, who's the most integral. Then it's like, okay, well, so you're saying that Arsenal fans shouldn't see them as a legend because they weren't the most integral in that team. Hang on. And therefore, if you can just go back and find a 2-month, 3-month, 4-month period, say where where Perez wasn't at his best, you can use that 6-month period to say, there you go. Everything else good he did.
Both things Perez is better than
no, but let me tell you about
written off because he wasn't the most integral in the treble winning team. And I found a period of his career where he was poor. Therefore, everything's fraudulent. That's why I don't like the logic.
Let me tell you the problem here. Do you know what the problem is? Is that people that do to Arsenal fans when they kept saying Saka's one of the best wingers in the world, Saka's this. It's all subjective to where you put Foden. I never said that Foden is a crap player. I just said, and I'm standing by, Foden is one of the guys at Man City. He isn't a stand-up player. There are 4, 5, 6 players ahead of him. I never said that Foden is not a talented player. He's a talented footballer. But the problem is with Man City and other English fans that keep saying that Phil Foden deserves a Ballon d'Or shout. What?
So Ballon d'Or shout. I want to jump in for a second here because I don't want the viewers to get cross paths here. Someone says, Terry, that's not what he's talking about. I agree. I get what you're saying. You're not saying he's a bad player. But I'm explaining, I'm getting attacked, right? I'm joking when I say that, for being exposed for not criticizing Phil Foden enough. But remember, Mr. Smile and Mo, what I said. My issue isn't with the criticism of Phil Foden. I think it's right this season. My only problem where I push back is the agendas where people are trying to create a conclusion against him based on this bad period of time, that everything that's come before is gone. Mo isn't doing that. So I'm not frustrated with what Mo is saying per se.